Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Everyone in my family pretends we're perfect during the holidays, but I learned the truth about us the Thanksgiving. I turned 17. My mom had been cooking since dawn, filling the house with smells of turkey and sage while my dad set up extra tables in the dining room because we were expecting 23 people. Uncle Nathan and Aunt Gloria had driven up from Phoenix with their kids. My grandparents brought their famous pecan pie, and even my cousin Melissa flew in from college. Everyone kept saying how perfect everything looked, how blessed we were to all be together. But nobody mentioned how Uncle Frank had shown up 40 minutes late with bloodshot eyes, and Caroline trailing behind him with her head down, wearing sunglasses inside the house. I noticed my mom exchange a quick glance with my dad when they walked in, but she just smiled harder and offered them drinks. I remember heading to the garage to grab more folding chairs because my mom needed them for the kids' table, and that's when I heard it. Not just arguing, but this awful sound of something hitting the wall hard, followed by Caroline's voice, high and scared, begging Frank to stop. Through the gap between our SUV and my dad's truck, I could see them near the back corner where we kept the gardening tools. Frank had Caroline pressed against the wall, his hand wrapped around her throat, and she was trying to push him away, but he was twice her size. Her sunglasses had fallen off, and even from where I stood, frozen behind the cars, I could see the purple bruising around her left eye wasn't fresh, maybe a week old, already turning that sick yellow-green color around the edges. His other hand was raised, fist clenched, and Caroline was making these tiny gasping sounds, trying to breathe. My phone was in my pocket, but my whole body felt paralyzed, like those nightmares where you need to run, but your legs won't work. Frank was saying something about money, about Caroline's sister knowing too much, about how she needed to keep her mouth shut if she knew what was good for her. Then he hit her. Not a slap, but a real punch to her ribs that made her double over. And suddenly I was moving without thinking, grabbing the first thing I could reach, which was an old baseball bat we kept by the door. I started hitting the metal shelving unit hard over and over, making as much noise as possible while yelling that I needed help finding something, acting like I hadn't seen them. Frank jumped back from Caroline immediately, and she slumped against the wall trying to catch her breath, quickly pulling her hair forward to hide her face. Frank walked around the cars with this casual smile, asking if I needed help finding something, but his knuckles were red and Caroline was still in the corner, shaking, trying to make herself small. I kept babbling about needing the chairs, the extra chairs for dinner, my voice coming out too high and fast, and Frank just stood there watching me with these dead eyes while Caroline slowly picked up her sunglasses from the concrete floor. When she finally walked past us toward the door, she moved like every step hurt, one arm wrapped around her middle, and Frank followed right behind her, his hand on her lower back in what probably looked gentle to anyone else. But I could see how his fingers were digging in, controlling where she walked. I carried 3 folding chairs inside, my arms shaking so bad I nearly dropped them twice, and found my mom arranging appetizers on the good china. I tried to tell her what I'd seen, but the words got all tangled up, and she just kept adjusting the crackers and cheese, not looking at me, saying we'd talk about it later, that now wasn't the time with everyone here. But I couldn't stop. I kept describing Caroline's face, the bruises, the way Frank had his hand around her throat, and my mom finally grabbed my wrist hard, harder than she'd ever grabbed me before, and said that Frank had problems, that he'd been struggling since he lost his job at the warehouse, that Caroline knew how to handle him. She said it like that made it okay. Like losing your job meant you could choke your girlfriend in our garage, and when I tried to argue, she just walked away carrying the appetizer tray, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen. During dinner, I watched everyone pretending everything was normal while Caroline sat there barely eating, flinching every time Frank reached across her for something. My Aunt Gloria kept filling the silence with stories about their vacation to Sedona. My grandpa talked about his garden, and my little cousins argued about video games, but I couldn't stop staring at the way Caroline held her fork with trembling fingers. Halfway through the meal, she excused herself to the bathroom and didn't come back for 15 minutes, and when she did, she'd reapplied makeup, but you could still see the swelling if you knew where to look. Frank made some joke about women and their tiny bladders, and everyone laughed, even my dad. And that's when I realized they all knew, every single adult at that table knew what Frank was doing to Caroline. After dinner, while everyone moved to the living room for coffee and pie, I pulled my cousin Melissa aside near the stairs and told her everything I'd witnessed in the garage. She listened without interrupting, her face getting paler with each detail, and when I finished, she told me this wasn't the first time, that she'd seen bruises on Caroline last Christmas too, fingerprint marks on her upper arms that Caroline had blamed on a gym accident. Melissa said she'd tried talking to Aunt Gloria about it once, but Gloria had shut her down immediately, saying that what happened between Frank and Caroline was their business, that every couple had their problems, and besides, Frank was paying for Caroline's nursing school and her mom's cancer treatments back in Ohio. That's when Melissa told me the real reason everyone stayed quiet. Frank had been lending money to half the family, $10,000 to Uncle Nathan for his restaurant, paying my grandparents' mortgage when Grandpa's pension got cut, even helping my parents with the down payment on our house 5 years ago. I felt sick listening to Melissa explain how deep Frank's financial hooks went into our family, how he'd show up at family gatherings with expensive gifts for the kids, always picking up the check at restaurants, playing the generous, successful cousin while everyone ignored Caroline's sunglasses and long sleeves in summer. Melissa said she'd found pills in Caroline's purse once when she was looking for gum, prescription bottles with 3 different doctors' names, and when she'd looked them up later, they were all heavy painkillers and anxiety medications. Frank controlled everything, Melissa said. Caroline's bank accounts, her car registration, even her phone plan, and he'd convinced her that her family back in Ohio didn't want anything to do with her anymore, though Melissa suspected that was just another lie to keep her isolated. While everyone was distracted with dessert, I slipped outside and called 911 from the front porch, telling them about the assault I'd witnessed, giving them our address, describing Caroline's injuries in detail. The dispatcher kept asking questions, whether Caroline needed immediate medical attention, if Frank had any weapons, and I answered everything as clearly as I could, even though my voice kept breaking. Within 10 minutes, 2 police cars pulled up without sirens but with their lights on, and suddenly the perfect Thanksgiving facade shattered completely. Frank tried to play it cool when the officers came to the door, saying there must be some misunderstanding, but Caroline was still visibly injured, and when the female officer took her aside to talk privately, she finally broke down and told them everything, not just about that day but about months of abuse, showing them older bruises under her clothes, the finger marks around her neck. What happened next was chaos in slow motion. Frank getting arrested right there in our driveway, while the neighbors watched from their windows, my mom crying and saying I'd ruined everything, my dad yelling at me about family loyalty, Uncle Nathan panicking about his restaurant loan, and my grandma just sitting on the couch staring at nothing, realizing her mortgage payments had been coming from a monster. But the worst part was when the police found cocaine in Frank's car during the search, nearly half a pound hidden in a compartment under the spare tire, along with scales and plastic bags, which explained where all his money really came from and why he was so paranoid about Caroline's sister, knowing too much. And suddenly his generosity looked different, like he'd been using our family to launder drug money, and everyone who'd taken his cash was potentially implicated in something much bigger than just staying quiet about domestic violence. The investigation that followed tore our family apart in ways we're still dealing with 8 years later. Uncle Nathan had to sell his restaurant when the feds froze the accounts connected to Frank's money. My grandparents almost lost their house until my mom's brother from California stepped in, and my parents spent thousands on a lawyer to prove they didn't know the down payment money was dirty. Caroline testified against Frank in court, sitting up there brave as hell, with her real family from Ohio, who'd been searching for her for 2 years after Frank made her disappear, and it turned out he'd been intercepting their calls and letters all along. She told the jury about the beatings, the forced pills to keep her compliant, the threats against her family if she ever tried to leave, and Frank got 25 years not just for the drugs, but for the domestic violence, kidnapping, and fraud charges they piled on. My family doesn't do big holiday gatherings anymore. We split into smaller groups that carefully avoid each other. Some still angry at me for calling the police that night, others grateful but too ashamed to say it out loud. Caroline sent me a message last year with a photo from her wedding, to a man who treats her right, standing there in a white dress with her sister as maid of honor, finally free and healing. She thanked me for being brave when all the adults were cowards, for doing what nobody else would do, even though it cost me my relationship with half my family. Sometimes I drive past our old house, sold now to help pay the legal bills, and I remember that Thanksgiving when I was 17 and learned that keeping the peace sometimes means enabling monsters, that family loyalty shouldn't come at the price of someone's safety, and that doing the right thing can destroy everything you know, but still be worth it in the end. My wife Amanda had been up since 5 that morning preparing the turkey, and by noon, our house in the Denver suburbs was packed with family. We'd bought the place right after our daughter turned 3, one of those quiet neighborhoods where people actually wave when they walk their dogs past your yard. Kevin, my younger brother, had driven in from Boulder with his kids, and they were already racing through the hallways with their cousins, while my mother-in-law arranged her famous green bean casserole on the kitchen counter. My dad kept sneaking pieces of cornbread when he thought nobody was watching, and Amanda's sister was mixing her 3rd mimosa while complaining about traffic on Interstate 25. It was exactly the kind of controlled chaos you expect on Thanksgiving, with the TV playing the parade in the background and conversations bouncing between football predictions and Black Friday plans. I remember checking my watch around 3:30, calculating when we'd need to start carving, feeling grateful for how normal everything seemed. That first knock came just after 4, while Amanda was transferring the turkey to the cutting board. 3 sharp raps, hard enough that our golden retriever Bailey immediately started going nuts, pawing at the door and whining. Through the side window, I could make out a figure in brown holding what looked like a medium-sized box, maybe the size of a microwave. My brother actually started walking toward the door, but I waved him off because we weren't expecting any deliveries, especially not on Thanksgiving. The knocking came again, louder this time, and a man's voice called out about needing a signature for an urgent package. Amanda caught my eye from the kitchen, shaking her head because she'd been tracking all her online orders and everything had already arrived. When I moved closer to peek through the peephole, I noticed the guy's uniform looked strange, like the color was slightly wrong for UPS and there were no visible logos or badges where they should have been. I called out through the door that we weren't expecting anything and he could leave it on the porch. His response made everyone in the living room go silent. He said he couldn't do that it required an adult signature, and then he added something that made 0 sense. He said he knew we were home because he could smell the turkey cooking. Kevin and I exchanged glances, and my dad actually stood up from his recliner, which took effort considering how much he'd already eaten. The man knocked again, this time using what sounded like the side of his fist, making the whole door frame rattle. Bailey was practically losing her mind now, growling in a way I'd never heard from her before. The guy's voice changed too, dropping the fake friendly delivery driver tone and becoming more insistent, almost angry, saying he'd been waiting out here for 20 minutes already and needed to get this done. Amanda grabbed her phone and started recording through the kitchen window that had a view of the front porch. The man must have heard her moving around because he suddenly stepped back from the door and turned toward the window. That's when we got our first real look at his face, and I'll never forget it. He had these pale gray eyes that didn't blink enough, and this scar that ran from his left ear down to his jaw, thick and ropey like it had been sewn up wrong. His hair was cut super short, almost military style, but grown out just enough to look unkempt. He smiled at Amanda through the window, but it was all teeth, no warmth behind it. He held up the package toward her and mouthed something we couldn't make out. My mother-in-law whispered that we should call the police, but my dad, always the tough guy, said we were overreacting about some delivery driver having a bad day. Then the guy did something that changed everything. He set the package down on our porch, pulled out his phone, and started taking pictures of our house. Not just the front door, but walking around getting angles of the windows, the garage, even crouching down to photograph our basement window wells. Kevin immediately dialed 911 while I ran upstairs to check on the kids, telling them to stay in the bedroom and keep playing their games. From the upstairs window, I watched him walk over to our cars in the driveway, taking photos of our license plates. He wasn't even trying to hide what he was doing anymore. The fake delivery uniform made even less sense now. I could see it had no company name anywhere, just a brown shirt and pants that anyone could buy at Walmart. He kept looking back at the house, specifically at the windows, like he was counting them or memorizing their positions. Amanda's sister started crying, saying she wanted to leave, but we couldn't exactly walk out there with him standing between us and our cars. My dad finally admitted this wasn't normal and grabbed a baseball bat from the garage, though I'm not sure what he planned to do with it through a locked door. The 911 operator told Kevin they'd send someone, but warned it might be 30 minutes because of holiday staffing. 30 minutes felt like a lifetime. The man had moved to our backyard now, actually opening our side gate like he owned the place. I could hear him testing the sliding glass door that led to our deck, the handle jiggling as Bailey barked herself hoarse on the other side of the glass. My mother-in-law herded all the kids into the main bedroom upstairs, turning on a movie loud enough to drown out what was happening. I grabbed a kitchen knife. Kevin found a crowbar in the basement, and we positioned ourselves by the back door, watching this stranger try every possible entrance to our home. He started talking to himself, or maybe to us, loud enough that we could hear him through the glass. He was saying things like he just needed 5 minutes inside, that he'd left something important here last time, which made no sense because there was no last time. Amanda was still recording everything on her phone when he picked up one of our deck chairs and held it over his head like he was about to throw it through the sliding door. That's when my dad completely lost it and started yelling through the glass that he had a gun, which he didn't, but the bluff worked for about 10 seconds before the guy started laughing. Not a normal laugh either, but this hollow sound that went on way too long. He set the chair down slowly, deliberately, then pressed his face right up against the glass door, cupping his hands around his eyes to see inside better. Bailey went absolutely ballistic, throwing herself at the door, and for a moment I thought she might actually break through the glass herself. The man suddenly pulled back and reached into his pocket, and I swear we all thought he was going for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and pressed it against the glass. From where I stood, I could see it was a printed map of our neighborhood with several houses circled in red marker, ours included. He tapped on our house on the map, then pointed at us through the glass, then drew his finger across his throat in that universal threatening gesture. Kevin was on the phone with 911 again, practically screaming at them to hurry up, giving them play-by-play of what was happening. The guy must have heard sirens in the distance because he suddenly backed away from the door, that creepy smile still plastered on his face. He gave us this mocking little salute, then calmly walked to the side gate like he had all the time in the world. We heard him go through to the front yard, and Amanda ran to the window to watch him actually skip down our driveway, still in that ridiculous fake uniform, carrying the package he'd brought with him. The police showed up maybe 3 minutes after he left, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing but no sirens. We practically dragged the officers inside, everyone talking at once, trying to explain what had just happened. Amanda showed them the video she'd recorded, and I watched one officer's face go from skeptical to concerned as he watched the man press his face against our back door. They took statements from all of us adults while the kids stayed upstairs, still watching their movie, thankfully oblivious to how close things had gotten to going really bad. One of the officers, a younger guy who looked like he'd just graduated from the academy, kept asking about the map the man had shown us, wanting to know exactly which houses were marked. His partner, an older woman with sergeant stripes, made a call on her radio using codes I didn't understand, but her tone made it clear this was serious. They searched our entire property with flashlights even though it wasn't fully dark yet, checking behind bushes in our shed, even up in the big oak tree in our backyard. The sergeant found something by our basement window that made her call for additional units. It was a small pile of cigarette butts, at least a dozen of them, all the same brand, like someone had been standing there for hours watching our house. She bagged them as evidence and asked if any of us smoked, which none of us did. That's when she told us something that made everyone go quiet. There had been 3 home invasions in Denver in the past month, all using the same method. A man in a delivery uniform showing up at family gatherings, holidays, or birthday parties when houses were full of people and potentially chaotic. The suspect had been released on parole just 6 weeks ago, after serving 5 years for aggravated assault and attempted kidnapping. The sergeant showed us a photo on her phone, asking if this was the man who'd been at our house. It was him, no question about it. Same scar, same dead eyes, same unsettling smile even in his mugshot. His name was Douglas Brennan, and he'd been staying at a halfway house about 10 miles from our neighborhood. She explained that he'd cut off his ankle monitor 2 days before Thanksgiving and disappeared. What really got me was when she mentioned that, in his previous crimes, he'd always studied his targets for days, sometimes weeks, learning their routines, figuring out when they'd be most vulnerable. Those cigarette butts by our basement window meant he'd probably been watching us long before Thanksgiving, maybe saw us bringing in groceries for the big meal, counting how many people would be there. The other marked houses on his map were all families in our area, who'd posted about holiday plans on social media, or had mentioned gatherings to neighbors who might have talked too freely. They caught Douglas Brennan 3 days later trying the same fake delivery routine at a house in Littleton, where a family was hosting a birthday party for their 10-year-old. This time someone had seen the police alerts and recognized him immediately, calling 911 before even answering the door. He tried to run but didn't make it 2 blocks before they got him. Amanda and I had to testify at his trial 6 months later, playing her video for the jury, describing every detail of that Thanksgiving afternoon. He got 25 years this time, no possibility of parole for at least 15. We ended up moving the following summer, not because we were scared exactly, but because none of us could look at that sliding glass door without remembering his face pressed against it. Our new house has a security system, cameras, and a German shepherd named Duke, who makes Bailey look friendly by comparison. We still host Thanksgiving, but now we have a simple rule. If we're not expecting someone, we don't open the door, period. Grace was fiddling with the radio again, trying to find something other than static as we drove through eastern Washington that Wednesday before Thanksgiving. 13 years old and already acting like she owned the car, while her brother Sam kept kicking the back of my seat every time he reached for his bag of chips on the floor. Laura sat next to me, scrolling through her phone for any rest stops ahead, occasionally reaching back to separate the kids when their bickering got too loud. We'd been driving for about 4 hours since leaving Portland, making our annual trek to visit my sister up in Montana, and everyone was getting that restless feeling you get on long drives when the scenery starts blending together into endless stretches of brown fields and distant mountains. After graduating college in 2010, I'd made this same drive dozens of times, first alone, then with Laura after we got married, and now with 2 kids who treated the 8-hour journey like some kind of endurance test designed specifically to torture them. When the gas gauge hit a quarter tank, I started scanning for the next exit, finally spotting a faded chevron sign rising above the sparse trees maybe a mile ahead. It was one of those isolated stations that seemed to exist solely for travelers, sitting at the edge of a town so small it probably didn't even have its own post office, just a cluster of weathered buildings and a single main road that the interstate had long since bypassed. Laura unbuckled as we pulled up to the pump, saying she'd take the kids inside for a bathroom break and to stock up on drinks, and I watched them pile out of the car, Sam racing ahead, while Grace walked with that exaggerated slowness teenagers perfect when they want everyone to know they're above such childish enthusiasm. Through the grimy glass doors, I could see them dispersing through the narrow aisles, Laura heading straight for the restrooms in back, while the kids gravitated toward the candy and chips. And that's when this man in a dark green jacket caught my attention. Not because he was doing anything particularly strange, just standing there by the energy drinks, but something about how he shifted his position when my family walked past made me keep watching. He was maybe 40-something, with one of those scraggly beards that looked more like neglect than style, wearing work boots that had seen better days and jeans with actual dirt on them, not the fashionable kind. What bothered me wasn't his appearance, though. It was how he kept pretending to read the labels on energy drink cans, while clearly tracking my family's movement through the store. Every time Sam moved to a different shelf, the guy would grab another can, angling his body to keep them in view. And when Grace wandered toward the ice cream freezer, he suddenly needed something from that exact direction. I finished pumping gas and headed inside, partly because I wanted a coffee for the road, but mostly because something about this guy's behavior was setting off every protective instinct I had. The little bell above the door chimed as I walked in, and he immediately turned his back to me, suddenly very interested in a rack of beef jerky near the register. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed with that particular frequency that gives you a headache if you stay too long, and the whole place smelled like old coffee and those rotating hot dogs that nobody ever actually buys. Sam had his arms full of candy bars and was negotiating with Laura about how many he could actually get, while Grace stood near the beverages doing that thing where she pretended not to care what anyone thought while secretly checking her reflection in the glass door. The man in the green jacket had moved again, now examining the motor oil display even though he hadn't come in with car keys, and there were no other vehicles at the pumps besides ours. When Laura called the kids to head to the register, he abandoned the motor oil and drifted toward the coffee station where I was filling up a cup, close enough that I could smell the cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket and see the yellow tinge under his fingernails. I positioned myself between him and my family as we checked out, watching him in the convex security mirror mounted above the register while the teenage cashier slowly scanned each item like it was his first day on the job. The man grabbed a single pack of gum and got in line behind us, even though there was another register open, standing close enough that Sam actually stepped forward and pressed against Laura's leg. Kids have that instinct about people sometimes, that animal sense that tells them when something's wrong, and Sam kept glancing back at the guy while clutching his bag of candy like someone might snatch it away. We paid and headed for the door, and I made sure to hold it open extra long, forcing the man to either squeeze past us or wait, and he chose to wait, hanging back by the coffee station and pretending to need more sugar packets until we were outside. Back at the car, I helped buckle Sam in while Laura got Grace situated, and I kept glancing at the store windows, catching glimpses of green jacket moving around inside, never actually leaving even though he'd been in line to pay. Laura asked if everything was all right. She had that look she gets when she knows I'm worried but doesn't want to alarm the kids, and I told her yeah, just wanted to get back on the road before it got too dark. We pulled out of the station and merged back onto the interstate, and I felt myself relax a little as we picked up speed, telling myself I was being paranoid, that the guy was just some local weirdo who didn't see many travelers come through. About 20 minutes later, Sam said he had to pee already, which was typical Sam, but when I glanced in the rear view to tell him he'd have to wait, I saw it. A beat-up white pickup truck about 3 cars behind us, and even from that distance, I could make out the shape of a dark jacket behind the wheel. At first I tried to rationalize it. White pickups are everywhere in this part of the country, practically the official vehicle of rural Washington, but I started doing little tests, speeding up to 75, then dropping down to 60, changing lanes unnecessarily. The truck stayed with us, always maintaining that same 3-car buffer like whoever was driving had done this before, knew exactly how to tail someone without being too obvious about it. Laura noticed me checking the mirrors more than usual, and asked what was wrong, her voice low enough that the kids wouldn't hear over Grace's music, and I told her about the guy from the gas station, watched her face go from confused to concerned as she turned around to look. The truck had fallen back a little, maybe 4 cars now, but it was definitely still there, and when I took the next exit just to see what would happen, making a last-second swerve across the solid white line, the pickup followed, nearly clipping a Honda to make the same exit. The exit led to nothing, just a frontage road that ran parallel to the interstate for a few miles, before dead-ending at some abandoned grain silos. No town, no services, no reason for anyone to get off there unless they were following someone. I pulled into a gravel turnout and watched the truck slow down, then suddenly accelerate past us, the driver keeping his face turned away. But I could see enough to know it was him. Same green jacket, same scraggly beard. He drove about a quarter mile ahead and pulled over too, just sitting there on the shoulder with his engine running, waiting. Laura was gripping her phone, asking if she should call 911. But what would we say? That some guy was creeping us out, that he'd taken the same exit we did. Technically, he hadn't done anything illegal yet, and we were still 2 hours from anywhere with a real police presence. I pulled back onto the frontage road and headed back toward the interstate on-ramp. And sure enough, in my rear view, I saw the truck's lights come on, saw it pull a U-turn to follow us back. Once we merged back onto the interstate, I pushed our Subaru up to 80, weaving through the light holiday traffic while Laura kept watch behind us, calling out the truck's position like some kind of navigator in a race neither of us wanted to be in. The kids had gone quiet. Grace's music turned off now, both of them sensing that something was seriously wrong even though we hadn't explicitly told them what was happening. Sam kept asking why we were going so fast, his voice small and worried. And Grace just stared out her window with her arms crossed, that teenage bravado completely gone. For about 10 miles, we managed to put some distance between us and the truck, but then traffic started bunching up ahead, brake lights spreading across all 3 lanes like a wave, and we had no choice but to slow down. Within minutes, the white pickup was back. Closer this time, maybe only 1 car between us, and I could see the driver clearly in my mirrors, see him leaning forward over his steering wheel like a predator locked onto prey. That's when he started getting aggressive, really aggressive, swerving into the lane next to us and pulling alongside our car, matching our speed exactly so he could stare through the passenger window at Laura and the kids. Grace screamed, actually screamed, and grabbed Sam, pulling him down below the window line while Laura fumbled with her phone, trying to film him while also shielding herself. The guy's face was different now, not trying to hide anything anymore. His mouth moving like he was yelling something we couldn't hear through the glass and highway noise. His free hand making gestures I didn't want to interpret. I slammed on the brakes, dropping back suddenly, and he shot ahead, but immediately slowed down too, boxing us in behind a semi-truck, not letting me change lanes, playing this sick game of automotive chess at 70 miles per hour. Every time I tried to get around him, he'd swerve to block me, and when I'd fall back, he'd slow down too, keeping us trapped. And I realized with absolute clarity that this wasn't random. This guy had picked us, specifically us. Back at that gas station, had seen a family traveling alone on a holiday and decided we were exactly what he was looking for. Laura was on the phone with 911 now, her voice shaking as she tried to explain our situation, reading off mile markers as we passed them. But the dispatcher kept asking for a license plate number, and Laura couldn't see it clearly from her angle, the truck positioned just right to hide it. I managed to break free for a second, gunning it around a minivan in the right lane, but the pickup immediately accelerated too, cutting off the minivan so aggressively that it swerved onto the shoulder, horn blaring. That's when I saw the sign for a rest area coming up in 2 miles. One of those big ones with multiple buildings and usually a state patrol presence, and I knew that was our only chance. I told Laura to tell the dispatcher we'd be at the Sprague Lake rest area in 2 minutes, to please have someone meet us there, and she repeated it twice, 3 times, making sure they understood. The guy must have seen the sign too, because suddenly he rammed us, actually rammed the back corner of our car, not hard enough to spin us out, but enough to make the whole vehicle lurch sideways, enough to make Sam start crying and Grace scream again. The next 2 miles felt like 20, him hitting us twice more, each impact sending my heart into my throat as I fought to keep control of the car, the kids sobbing in the back seat while Laura kept the dispatcher on the line, describing everything that was happening in real time. When the rest area exit finally appeared, I didn't signal, didn't slow down until the last possible second, then yanked the wheel hard to the right, tires screaming as we barely made the off-ramp. The pickup tried to follow but was going too fast, shooting past the exit, and I saw his brake lights flare as he locked up his wheels, skidding along the shoulder. We flew into the rest area parking lot, and I headed straight for the most crowded section, pulling right up to the main building where dozens of people were milling around. families stretching their legs, truck drivers checking their phones, witnesses everywhere. I threw the car in park and told everyone to stay inside, doors locked, while I got out and stood where I could see the entrance, waiting to see if that white truck would appear, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and rage and fear all mixed together. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and no white pickup, but 2 state patrol cars came screaming into the rest area, lights flashing, pulling up on either side of our car like they were creating a protective barrier. One of the troopers, a woman with short gray hair and the kind of calm demeanor that made you feel instantly safer, took Laura's statement while her partner, a younger guy built like a linebacker, walked around our Subaru taking pictures of the damage, 3 distinct dents in the rear bumper and quarter panel where he'd hit us. They told us they'd already put out a bolo for the white pickup, had units watching the interstate in both directions, and about 20 minutes later the female trooper got a call on her radio, listened for a moment, then told us they'd got him. Pulled him over about 15 miles up the road, found meth in his truck along with zip ties, a knife and a notebook with license plates and descriptions of different vehicles, all family cars, all with out-of-state plates, pages and pages of them dating back months. The trooper said we'd need to file a full report, maybe testify if it went to trial, but that we were safe now, that this guy wouldn't be following anyone else for a very long time. Turns out he'd been involved in 3 attempted carjackings just that week, all targeting families traveling for the holiday, using the same pattern: follow them from gas stations, intimidate them on the highway, try to force them off the road in isolated spots. We were lucky we'd made it to the rest area. Lucky the dispatcher had taken Laura seriously. Lucky in ways that still make me sick to think about when I imagine what could have happened if we'd broken down, or if he'd succeeded in forcing us off the road somewhere remote. We spent another hour at the rest area, giving statements, calming the kids down, calling my sister to explain why we'd be late, then finally got back on the road with a state patrol escort for the first 50 miles, the trooper following us until we crossed into Idaho. The rest of the drive to Montana was quiet, nobody wanting music, nobody asking for snacks, just 4 people processing what had happened, grateful to be together, grateful to be safe, grateful that sometimes the monsters who pick you don't get to keep you. November has always been my favorite month, especially since Mom started hosting Thanksgiving at her place in Springfield after Dad passed. Picture this: me, 31, and finally getting my life together after that rough patch with my ex, standing in Mom's kitchen peeling sweet potatoes while she fusses over her famous cornbread stuffing. My brother Jason was supposed to arrive around noon with his wife Katie and their twin boys, and my sister Olivia had texted saying she'd be there by 2, right after picking up the pies from that bakery on Harrison Street. Mom kept checking her phone every few minutes, worried about the traffic since everyone was driving in for the holiday, and I remember telling her to relax, that everyone would get there when they got there. Around 1:30, just as I was sliding the turkey back into the oven for its final hour, Mom's phone buzzed with a text. She was elbow deep in green bean casserole prep, so she asked me to check it for her, thinking it was probably Jason saying they were running late because the twins needed another bathroom stop. But when I picked up her phone and read the message, everything in that warm, cinnamon-scented kitchen suddenly felt wrong. The text was from a number none of us recognized, and it said, "We have your daughter. She screamed so pretty when we grabbed her. If you want to see her again, get $50,000 ready. Don't call cops or she dies. Wait for instructions." My first thought was that this had to be some sick joke. Maybe one of Olivia's weird theater friends pulling a prank. But the way it was written, the specific details, made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. Mom must have seen something change in my face because she immediately dropped the spoon she was holding, green beans scattering across the counter. I showed her the phone, watched her face go from confused to terrified in about 3 seconds flat. She grabbed the phone from me and immediately tried calling Olivia, but it went straight to voicemail. Then she tried again and again, each time getting more frantic. I pulled out my own phone and started texting Olivia while Mom left increasingly desperate voicemails. "Baby, please call me back right now. Please, this is an emergency." Jason and Katie walked in right then with the twins, all loud and cheerful, carrying grocery bags full of wine and that special cranberry sauce Katie always brings, and they stopped dead when they saw us. I explained the situation while Mom kept trying Olivia's phone, and Jason's first reaction was to Google the number that sent the text. Turns out, there had been a bunch of these scams going around that month, especially targeting older people around the holidays. Scammers would text claiming they had kidnapped someone, banking on the panic to make people wire money before they could think straight or verify anything. Jason showed us article after article about it, cases from all over the state, and for a minute we all breathed a little easier. Katie even laughed nervously and said her mom had gotten a similar text the week before about her brother, who was sitting right next to her when it came through. But then Mom pointed out something that made us all go quiet. Olivia really wasn't answering her phone, and she was supposed to have been here 30 minutes ago. Jason tried to stay logical about it, said maybe her phone died, maybe she got stuck in traffic, maybe she forgot to charge it like she always does. But I could see him checking his own phone every few seconds, refreshing her social media to see if she'd posted anything. The bakery was only 20 minutes away, and even with holiday traffic, she should have been here by now. Mom wanted to call the police right then, but Jason kept saying we should wait, that if it really was just a scam and Olivia walked through the door any minute, we'd feel stupid for panicking. Katie took the twins to the living room to watch cartoons, trying to keep them away from whatever was happening in the kitchen. I remember the turkey timer going off right then, this cheerful little ding that seemed completely wrong for the moment, and none of us moved to check it. That's when Mom's phone buzzed again, same unknown number. This time it was a photo, and when Mom opened it, she actually gasped and dropped the phone on the floor. Jason snatched it up before I could see, but his face went completely white. He turned the screen toward me, and there was Olivia's car, that distinctive rust-colored sedan with the dent in the passenger door from when she backed into a mailbox last year. The photo was taken from inside another vehicle, through a window speckled with rain, and you could see Olivia's car pulled over on what looked like a service road, driver's door hanging open. No sign of Olivia herself, just that open door like a mouth screaming. The text under the photo said, "TikTok $50,000 1 hour, next photo won't be of her car." Mom started crying then, these horrible choking sobs, and I felt like the floor was tilting under my feet. Jason called 911 while I held Mom, trying to keep her from completely falling apart. The dispatcher was surprisingly calm, said they'd been getting calls like this all week, that it was definitely a scam ring operating out of state. She told us officers would come to take a report, but she also said we should try to reach Olivia through other means, check with her friends, her work, anywhere she might have stopped. I started making calls while Jason talked to the police, my fingers fumbling with the phone, calling her roommate Bethany, her boyfriend Connor, even her manager at the restaurant where she worked weekends. Nobody had heard from her since that morning when she left to pick up the pies. Connor said she'd seemed totally normal, excited about the dinner, had even shown him a picture of the chocolate cream pie she'd ordered specially for me because she knew it was my favorite. The police showed up faster than I expected, 2 officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on Thanksgiving. The older one, Officer Ramirez, took one look at the texts and the photo, and immediately said it matched the pattern they'd been seeing. He explained that the scammers usually grabbed photos from social media, or even took random photos of similar cars to make their threats seem real. He asked if Olivia had posted anything about her car recently, maybe on Instagram or Facebook, and sure enough, when we checked, she'd posted a photo of it just 2 days ago, complaining about needing new tires. The younger officer was already on his radio, asking dispatch to ping Olivia's phone location, which apparently they could do even if the phone was off. Mom kept insisting this was different, that the timing was too perfect, that whoever sent the photo knew exactly what Olivia's car looked like, knew she'd be driving today. Then the younger cop's radio crackled to life, and what we heard made everyone in that kitchen go still. They'd found a ping from Olivia's phone. Last active location was near the intersection of Route 44 and Millbrook Road, which was exactly on her route from the bakery. But here's what made my knees go weak. The phone had been stationary there for the past 45 minutes. Officer Ramirez tried to play it cool, said maybe she'd stopped for gas or had car trouble, but I could see him exchange a look with his partner. He asked Jason to drive out there with him while the younger officer stayed with us. Jason grabbed his keys so fast he knocked over Katie's purse, and I watched them leave, the turkey still in the oven, now definitely overcooked, the smell of burning starting to fill the kitchen. 20 minutes passed like hours. Mom sat at the kitchen table, gripping her phone, staring at it like she could will it to ring with Olivia's name on the screen. Katie had given up pretending everything was fine, and brought the twins into the kitchen, where they sat quietly, somehow sensing this wasn't the time for their usual chaos. The younger officer, barely older than Olivia herself, kept trying to reassure us, sharing statistics about how these scams worked, how the scammers were probably in another country, how they'd picked Olivia's information randomly. But then Mom's phone lit up with another text, and this time it was different. It was a voice message, and when Mom played it on speaker, we heard Olivia's voice, but strange, slurred like she was drugged or had been crying. "Mom, please, just give them what they want. They know about the bakery. They were waiting. They know our whole schedule. Please, I'm so scared." The message cut off with what sounded like a car door slamming. The young officer immediately got on his radio, his casual demeanor completely gone now, calling for backup at the Route 44 location. Mom was already pulling up her banking app, ready to transfer whatever money she had, but the officer stopped her, said we needed to wait for Officer Ramirez to report back first. That's when my phone rang, Jason's name on the screen, and when I answered, his voice was shaking in a way I'd never heard before. They'd found Olivia's car exactly where the phone had pinged, abandoned on a pull-off near the woods. Her purse was still on the passenger seat, the bakery box with our pies sitting in the back, one of them smashed like there'd been a struggle. But the worst part, the part that made me grab the counter to keep from falling, was what they found on the driver's seat. A printed photo of our whole family from last Thanksgiving, the one Mom had posted on Facebook, with Olivia's face circled in red marker. Jason said they were treating it as a real kidnapping now, that state police were on the way, that they were going to trace the calls and do everything possible. The younger officer was already helping Mom set up the money transfer, saying they'd track it, use it to find whoever had Olivia. But something kept nagging at me, this detail I couldn't quite place. Then it hit me. In the voice message, Olivia had said, "They know our whole schedule, but I'd never told anyone except family what time she was picking up the pies." I mentioned this to the officer, and his face changed. He asked if we had any family members who might have gambling debts, drug problems, anyone who might have given information to the wrong people. That's when Katie, who'd been silent this whole time, spoke up. She said Connor, Olivia's boyfriend, had been acting strange lately, that Olivia had mentioned he'd been asking a lot of questions about our family, about Mom's retirement savings, about the house. She said Olivia was planning to break up with him after Thanksgiving. The police moved fast after that. Within minutes, they had Connor's phone number, his address, his plate number, everything. The young officer stepped outside to coordinate with dispatch, and through the window I could see him gesturing urgently. Mom had gone quiet, this awful kind of quiet where I knew she was replaying every interaction with Connor, every time she'd welcomed him into her home. Then Jason called again. They'd pulled security footage from the gas station near where Olivia's car was found. The timestamp showed her stopping there at 1:47 p.m., and she wasn't alone. There was someone in a baseball cap in the passenger seat, but here's what made everyone's blood run cold. Olivia had gone inside the store alone, bought water and aspirin, and the security footage showed her mouthing "help me" to the camera. The clerk hadn't noticed, too busy with the holiday rush. By the time she got back to her car, whoever was with her had moved to the driver's seat. Everything happened fast after that. The state police tracked Connor's phone to a motel off Route 91, about 40 miles north. They found him there with two other men, brothers with records for extortion and kidnapping. The whole thing had been planned for weeks, Connor feeding them information, telling them when Olivia would be alone, what route she'd take, how much money our family had. They'd grabbed her right outside the bakery parking lot, forced her into her own car, drove her to that pull-off to switch vehicles. The police found Olivia in one of the motel rooms, drugged but alive, tied up in the bathroom. Connor had been recording her voice for more messages, planning to drag it out, milk our family for everything they could get. When they brought Olivia to the hospital and she finally could talk, she told us Connor had seemed so normal that morning, had even kissed her goodbye, told her to have fun at dinner. She said the moment she saw him in her car outside the bakery, passenger door open, asking for a quick ride. She knew something was wrong, but by then one of the brothers was already behind her, pushing her into the vehicle. We spent Thanksgiving night in the hospital waiting room instead of around our dinner table. The turkey I'd forgotten in the oven was completely ruined. The house still smelled like smoke when we finally went back days later to clean up. Olivia had bruises on her wrists from the zip ties, and for months afterward she'd panic if anyone walked too close behind her in a parking lot. Connor got 8 years. The brothers got 12 each. During the trial, we learned Connor had been planning this since September, when he'd overheard Mom talking about her retirement account at a family barbecue. He'd met the brothers through his cousin who owed them money, and they'd convinced him this was his way to start fresh, that Olivia's family had plenty to spare. What still haunts me is how he sat through dinners with us, laughed at Mom's jokes, helped Dad fix the garage door that time, all while planning to terrorize our family for money. The real kicker came out during the investigation. We weren't the first family they'd done this to. They'd run the same play 3 times before in different states, always around holidays when families were gathering, when people were distracted and vulnerable. They'd refined their technique, learned exactly how to create maximum panic, how to make the scam calls they'd studied seem real by adding personal touches. The only reason they got caught this time was because Connor got greedy, wanted a bigger cut, and stayed too long at the motel arguing about the split. If they'd left right after grabbing Olivia, they probably would have gotten away with it. Now, every Thanksgiving when we gather at Mom's house, we triple-check the locks, we share our locations on our phones, and we never joke about being late. Olivia still comes, brings her new husband and their baby girl now, but she always parks where she can see her car from the window, and none of us post anything on social media until after we're home. That perfectly staged family photo stays private now, because we learned the hard way that sometimes the real danger comes from the people who already know exactly where to find you. Hosting Thanksgiving dinner wasn't something I ever planned on doing. My sister usually handled the whole family gathering thing at her place in Connecticut, but she just had her second kid in September and basically begged me to take over this year. So there I was, 26, and suddenly responsible for feeding 14 people in a house I'd only been renting for 8 months. The place was perfect for it, though. This old 2-story colonial in Burlington, Vermont, with a massive dining room and a kitchen that actually had counter space. I'd spent the entire week before scrubbing floors and arguing with my landlord about whether the oven was supposed to make that grinding noise when it preheated. My boyfriend Troy helped me move furniture around and set up the folding tables we'd borrowed from his parents. We made it work. The house looked warm and lived in for the first time since I'd moved up here for the teaching job at the middle school. Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, I was in the backyard trying to figure out if I had enough propane in the tank for the portable heater we wanted to use on the back porch. It was cold as hell, maybe 20 degrees, and there was this crusty layer of snow from a storm the previous weekend that hadn't fully melted. The sun was already going down around 4:30 because Vermont in November is basically nighttime all day long. I was crouched down by the heater, trying to read the gauge in the dim light from the porch, when I noticed these prints in the snow leading from the back fence line straight up to the basement windows. They weren't animal tracks. They were boot prints, pretty large ones, and they came right up to the 2 small windows that looked into our unfinished basement. The prints stopped there, directly in front of the glass like someone had stood there for a while. Then they continued along the foundation of the house toward the side yard where our trash bins were kept. My first thought was that maybe it was Troy, that he'd come around back to check something while I was inside earlier. But Troy wore size 11 sneakers, and these prints were bigger, more like a size 13 or 14 work boot, with a really distinct tread pattern. I could see the deep ridges even in the half-frozen snow. I stood there staring at them, my breath making clouds in the cold air, and tried to think of a rational explanation. Maybe the landlord had sent someone to check the furnace exhaust vent or the gas meter. Maybe it was the neighbor's teenage son cutting through our yard. Except the furnace vent was on the other side of the house, the gas meter was out front, and the prints came from the back fence, not from either neighboring property. They came from the wooded area behind our house where there was nothing except bare trees and the old railroad bed that hadn't been used in decades. I took a picture with my phone, mostly so I could show Troy and confirm I wasn't being paranoid, then went back inside. The house was warm and smelled like the pumpkin pie I'd baked earlier for practice. I showed Troy the picture when he came over that evening with the beer his dad had requested for dinner. He looked at it, zoomed in on the boot prints, and got this expression I'd never really seen on him before. Troy was usually pretty easygoing, the kind of guy who laughed off most things, but he wasn't laughing now. He asked if I'd checked the basement windows from inside, and I told him I hadn't because, honestly, it hadn't occurred to me. Our basement was just concrete and spider webs and the water heater. I never went down there unless I absolutely had to. We went down together, Troy first, flipping on the light at the top of the wooden stairs. The basement was freezing, way colder than it should have been. The two windows that faced the backyard were small, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet each, set high up near the ceiling. They had those old metal frames that didn't lock properly, just a little latch that you could probably force open with a screwdriver. Troy walked over to them, and that's when we both saw it. One of the windows was open, just a crack, maybe 2 inches. The latch was bent at an odd angle. Troy closed it immediately and forced the latch back into place as much as he could, but the metal was warped and it wouldn't hold right. He asked if I had anything we could use to secure it, and I ran upstairs to grab the toolbox from the hall closet. We ended up jamming a wooden dowel rod into the window frame to keep it from opening, which felt incredibly flimsy, but was better than nothing. The whole time we were doing this, I kept thinking about the fact that someone had been standing outside my house, looking into my basement, trying to get inside. Troy said we should call the police and file a report, but it was almost 8 at night on the day before Thanksgiving, and I just wanted to believe it was some random thing. Maybe kids messing around or someone who got confused about which house was theirs. That sounds stupid now, but in the moment I was more focused on the fact that my entire family was showing up in less than 24 hours, and I hadn't even started brining the turkey yet. Troy made me promise to at least mention it to the landlord, which I agreed to, and then we went back upstairs and tried to pretend everything was normal. Thanksgiving Day was chaos from the moment I woke up. My parents arrived first around 10 in the morning with my grandmother, who immediately criticized the way I'd arranged the dining room chairs. Then my sister showed up with her husband and their 2 kids, the baby screaming the second they walked through the door. Troy's parents came around noon with enough side dishes to feed 20 people, and my aunt and uncle rolled in an hour later with my 3 cousins, who were all under 12 and immediately started tearing through the house like wild animals. By 2 in the afternoon, the kitchen was a disaster of mixing bowls and turkey drippings, and someone had already spilled red wine on the hallway rug. I barely had time to think about the basement window. The house was loud and bright and full of people, exactly what Thanksgiving is supposed to be. We ate around 4, and it actually turned out pretty well despite my anxiety about the whole thing. The turkey wasn't dry, the mashed potatoes were creamy, and even my grandmother said the stuffing was decent, which from her was basically a standing ovation. Around 6:30, right when we were clearing plates and my sister was cutting into the pies, every light in the house went out. Just dropped us straight into darkness. The kids started screaming immediately, and my grandmother made this startled noise that would have been funny under different circumstances. My dad said it was probably a breaker and headed toward the basement with his phone flashlight, but I stopped him. I told him I'd go check it because I knew where the panel was, which was technically true, but really I just didn't want him going down there after what Troy and I had found. Troy came with me and we took the stairs slowly, our phone lights bouncing off the concrete walls. The breaker panel was on the far wall, and when we got to it, every single switch was still in the on position. Nothing had tripped. Troy flipped the main breaker off and then back on anyway, just to see, but nothing happened. The house stayed dark. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't the usual basement mustiness. It was cold air, fresh and sharp, like when you open a door in winter. We both turned at the same time toward those basement windows. The dowel rod we'd jammed into the frame was on the floor, just lying there on the concrete. The window was wide open, pushed up as far as it would go, and freezing air was pouring in. Troy grabbed my arm hard enough that it hurt and pulled me back toward the stairs. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. We went up fast and I shut the basement door behind us, which had one of those old keyed locks that I'd never used before. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in, but I managed it and locked the door. Everyone was still in the dining room, my dad trying to use his phone to figure out if it was a neighborhood-wide outage, my mom lighting candles she'd found in the kitchen drawer. I pulled Troy into the hallway and whispered that we needed to call the police right now. He was already dialing. The police took about 15 minutes to arrive, which felt like hours. In that time, I had to explain to my confused family why we'd locked the basement door, and why I looked like I was about to pass out. My dad wanted to go down there himself with a flashlight and investigate, very typical dad behavior. But Troy physically stood in front of the door and told him that wasn't happening until the cops got there. My sister was trying to keep the kids calm and away from the windows, and my mom kept asking if someone was in the house, if we were safe, should we all leave right now. I didn't have good answers. All I knew was that window had been closed and secured when we went upstairs, and now it was wide open. 2 officers showed up, a man and a woman, both holding those heavy-duty flashlights that lit up the whole front yard when they walked up to the porch. I explained everything quickly while my entire family crowded into the hallway listening. The male officer, his name tag said Officer Huang, asked if anyone had gone outside since the power went out, and I said no. Everyone had stayed inside. They went down to the basement first with their flashlights and weapons drawn, which made the whole thing feel suddenly very real and very dangerous in a way it hadn't before. We all waited at the top of the stairs, nobody talking, just the sound of the officers moving around down there and their radio crackling with static. They were down there for maybe 5 minutes before they came back up. Officer Huang said the basement was clear, nobody was inside, but the window had definitely been tampered with. The frame had fresh scratches on it, and there were muddy prints on the concrete floor right under the window, like someone had hoisted themselves up to look inside or had started to climb through. The female officer, Officer Brennan, wait, no, that name is on my banned list, Officer Vincent, asked if we'd seen anyone suspicious in the neighborhood recently or if we'd had any problems before. I told her about the footprints I'd found Wednesday night and showed her the picture on my phone. She and Officer Huang exchanged a look that made my stomach turn. Officer Vincent asked if we could step outside to talk, away from the kids, so Troy and I followed them onto the front porch while my parents stayed inside with everyone else. She told us there had been 4 other attempted break-ins reported in Burlington that evening, all within a 3-mile radius of my house, all during the dinner hours between 5 and 7. The pattern was specific and deliberate. Someone, possibly more than one person, had been targeting houses that appeared empty or quiet from the outside during Thanksgiving dinner. Most families were gathered at one house, which meant a lot of homes in the area were actually vacant, and even the ones that were occupied, like mine, had all their family packed into the dining room at the back of the house. From the street or the backyard, you couldn't tell if anyone was home. The cars were all parked in driveways, but that was normal for the holiday. Officer Huang said they'd caught the guy about 40 minutes ago, actually caught him, climbing through a window 2 streets over on Willow Ridge Drive. The homeowners had been at their daughter's house for dinner and came back early because their grandson got sick. They pulled into their driveway and saw someone halfway through their kitchen window. The power outage, Officer Vincent explained, hadn't been an accident or a tripped breaker. Someone had cut the external power line to my house from the pole in the alley behind my property. They found the cut line while they were checking the perimeter. It was a clean cut done with bolt cutters or something similar, and it had been done recently, probably right around the time my family was sitting down to eat. The person they'd arrested wasn't talking much yet, but he had tools on him. Bolt cutters, a pry bar, gloves, and a backpack full of garbage bags. Officer Huang said the working theory was that he'd been casing houses for days, maybe even a week or more, figuring out which ones would be empty or distracted during the holiday. My house probably looked like a target because it was on a corner lot with a big backyard that backed up to those woods, easy to approach without being seen from the street. But then we'd had 14 people show up and the house was blazing with lights and noise, so he'd waited. He'd cut the power hoping we'd all panic and leave, or that it would create enough confusion for him to slip in through the basement while everyone was distracted upstairs. I felt sick hearing all of this. The idea that someone had been watching my house, that they'd been out there in the dark while we were eating turkey and laughing at my uncle's bad jokes, that they'd cut my power and tried to get inside while my nieces and nephews were running around upstairs. Officer Vincent must have seen the look on my face because she put her hand on my shoulder and told me the important thing was that everyone was safe and the person responsible was in custody. They'd have someone come out in the morning to fix the power line, and they were going to increase patrols in the neighborhood for the next few weeks. She also strongly recommended I get proper locks installed on those basement windows and maybe consider a security system. Troy said he'd take care of the locks himself this weekend, and he did. We spent Saturday at the hardware store buying window locks, motion sensor lights for the backyard, and a deadbolt for the basement door. My landlord wasn't thrilled about us installing everything without permission, but when I explained what happened, he backed off pretty quickly. The power company came Friday morning and had us up and running by noon. My family ended up staying an extra day because nobody wanted to leave me alone in the house, which was annoying, but also kind of touching. My sister kept checking all the locks every hour, and my dad insisted on walking the entire perimeter of the property with Troy before they finally left on Saturday afternoon. The whole thing changed how I felt about the house, honestly. I'd loved how quiet and private it was when I first moved in, how it was tucked away on that corner lot with the woods behind it. Now those same things made me anxious. I started keeping lights on at night, even in rooms I wasn't using, and I never opened the curtains anymore on the first floor. Troy ended up staying over most nights for the next month until his lease was up, and he just officially moved in with me in January. We got a dog too, a German Shepherd mix from the shelter named Rusty, who barks at absolutely everything, which used to annoy me, but now I find it reassuring. The guy they arrested, I found out later through a local news article, had a history of burglaries going back years in 3 different states. He'd always targeted holidays, times when he knew people would be distracted or away from home. He pleaded guilty eventually and got sentenced to 8 years. I never saw his face except in the mugshot that ran in the paper, and I'm glad for that. I don't want to be able to recognize him if I ever pass him on the street. What sticks with me most isn't even the scary part, the open window or the cut power line. It's how normal everything felt right up until it wasn't. How I was worried about whether the turkey would be dry, and whether my grandmother would criticize my decorating, and the whole time someone was outside in the dark, watching and waiting. That's the part that still gets to me. Thanksgiving dinner was already running 2 hours late by the time we finally sat down to eat. My mom's ancient oven had decided to quit halfway through cooking the turkey, and we'd spent most of the afternoon in full panic mode, trying to finish everything on the stovetop and in her little countertop convection thing that she'd bought off some infomercial. But nobody really cared about the delay. My brother Colin had flown in from Texas with his wife Jenna and their twin boys, and my sister Vanessa drove up from Maryland with her husband Brett. I'd brought my girlfriend Amy, who was meeting most of my family for the first time and handling the chaos better than I'd expected. We were all crammed into Mom's house in rural Pennsylvania, the same place where we'd grown up, surrounded by woods and sitting on about 3 acres of land with the nearest neighbor a quarter mile away. Dad built the place back in the 80s, and after he passed in 2015, Mom refused to move despite how isolated it was. She loved the quiet, loved the privacy, but I'd always worried about her being out here alone. By the time we actually started eating, it was past 8 o'clock and pitch black outside. The twins were practically falling asleep in their mashed potatoes, and the rest of us were making up for lost time, passing dishes and piling our plates high with everything Mom had managed to salvage. Colin and Brett were arguing about football, Vanessa was telling some story about her nightmare commute up from Maryland, and Amy kept catching my eye from across the table with this amused smile, like she couldn't believe this was my family. The windows reflected our faces back at us, dark mirrors against the November night, and I could hear the wind picking up outside, rattling the old wooden siding. Someone made a joke about how we'd all need to be rolled out to our cars, and Mom was laughing, her face flushed from the wine and the heat of the kitchen. Everything felt right, you know, like we'd finally got the whole family back together after years of everyone being scattered. Then I noticed the kitchen trash can overflowing in the corner, stuffed with turkey packaging and potato peels and wadded paper towels, and I pushed back from the table to take it out before Mom could protest that I was a guest. The cold hit me the second I stepped outside. I mean, really hit me. That kind of November cold in Pennsylvania that goes straight through your shirt and makes you regret not grabbing a jacket. The motion sensor light on the back porch flickered on, casting this harsh white glow across the yard and making the tree line look even darker by contrast. I hauled the trash bag toward the bins we kept on the side of the house, my breath coming out in clouds, and that's when I saw them. Footprints in the thin layer of snow that had fallen that afternoon. The kind of dusting that barely covers the grass but shows every mark. They came from the woods, crossed the yard in a deliberate line, and curved around toward the back of the house. Big prints, way bigger than mine, with a tread pattern I didn't recognize. Work boots, maybe, or hiking boots. Fresh too, because the edges were still sharp and clean, not melted or filled in. I stood there holding the trash bag, staring at those prints, and my brain tried to come up with some reasonable explanation. Maybe a neighbor cutting through the property, maybe someone lost in the woods. But we didn't have the kind of neighbors who just wandered onto the property, and nobody in their right mind would be hiking through the woods in the dark on Thanksgiving night. I followed the prints with my eyes, tracing their path around the side of the house. They went right past the dining room windows where we'd all been sitting, close enough that whoever made them could have looked inside and seen everything. Seen all of us. Counted how many people were there. I dropped the trash bag next to the bins and walked along the house, following the tracks. My heart was starting to pound now, that sick feeling creeping into my chest, because the prints didn't stop at the side of the house. They kept going all the way to the back door. The door we used to go in and out of the kitchen, the one Mom had mentioned forgetting to lock lately. Reached the back steps and saw where the prints stopped, right at the bottom step, like someone had stood there. Just stood there and looked at the door. Or maybe tried the handle. I turned and looked back at the tracks leading away, and that's when I realized they only went one direction. Into the yard, around the house, up to the back door. But there were no prints leading away. None. Whoever made those tracks was still here. I practically ran back inside, letting the door slam behind me harder than I meant to. Everyone looked up from their plates, and I must have had some expression on my face because Amy immediately asked if I was okay. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried not to sound like I was losing it, but I told them about the footprints, about how they came from the woods, circled the house, stopped at the back door, and didn't leave. Colin put his fork down and got up without saying anything, heading for the back door with Brett right behind him. Jenna pulled the twins closer to her, and I saw Mom's face go pale. Vanessa asked if I was sure, if maybe the wind had covered up the return tracks, and I wanted to believe that, except I knew what I'd seen. Those prints were fresh, the edges crisp, and there was nowhere for return tracks to hide. Colin came back in after maybe 2 minutes, and his jaw was tight in that way it used to get when we were kids, and he was trying not to scare me. He confirmed everything. Prints all around the house, stopping at the back door, nothing leading away. Brett checked the front door and all the ground floor windows while Colin was outside, making sure everything was locked. We all stood there in the kitchen for a moment, nobody quite knowing what to do, and then Colin said we should call the police. Mom was already reaching for her phone when we heard it. A soft sound, barely audible under the noise we were all making, but distinct. A creak. The old hardwood floors in the hallway that connects the kitchen to the bedrooms, the ones that groan no matter how carefully you walk on them. We all went completely silent, and I mean the kind of silence where you can hear your own pulse in your ears. Another creak, slow and deliberate. like someone taking a single careful step, then another. Amy grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt, and I saw Jenna cover one of the twins' mouths before he could say anything. The footsteps were coming from the hallway, moving toward the kitchen, and I realized with this sick certainty that someone had been in the house the whole time. While we were eating, while we were laughing and passing dishes and completely distracted, someone had walked through that back door and made their way down the hall. They'd been listening to us, waiting. Colin moved first, grabbing a knife from the block on the counter, and Brett picked up the heavy cast iron skillet Mom had used for the green beans. I grabbed my phone and started dialing 911, my fingers shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The dispatcher answered, and I whispered that someone was in the house, gave her the address, told her to send police immediately. She kept asking questions, asking if we were safe, if we could get out. But I couldn't focus on her words because those footsteps in the hallway had stopped. Just stopped completely, like whoever was there had realized we'd heard them. The silence was somehow worse than the creaking. We all stared at the doorway leading to the hall, and I could see it from where I stood, that dark rectangle opening into the unlit corridor. The dispatcher was still talking in my ear, telling me to stay on the line, telling me units were on the way, but the nearest police station was 20 minutes out, and we all knew it. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. Mom herded Jenna and the twins toward the corner farthest from the hallway, and Vanessa grabbed another knife, her hand wrapped so tight around the handle her knuckles were white. Then we heard the sound of the back door opening. Not the front door, not a window, but the same back door I'd just come through minutes ago. The one we'd all been staring at, the one we thought we'd locked after Colin checked the footprints. The sound of it opening was unmistakable, that specific squeak of the hinges that Dad had never gotten around to fixing, and then the soft click of it closing again. Footsteps on the back porch, heavy and quick, running away from the house. Colin bolted for the back door with Brett right behind him, and I followed even though every instinct told me not to. We burst outside into the cold, and I swept the yard with my phone's flashlight. There, crossing the yard toward the woods, I saw a figure. Tall, dressed in dark clothes, moving fast but not quite running anymore, like they didn't need to rush, like they'd accomplished what they came for. The figure reached the tree line and turned back for just a second, and even though I couldn't make out a face in the darkness, I felt them looking at us. Then they disappeared into the woods, and the forest swallowed them completely. Colin started to go after them, but Brett grabbed his arm and pulled him back, said it was too dangerous, too dark. We didn't know if they were armed. We stood there on the back porch, breathing hard, staring at the spot where the figure had vanished. My phone was still connected to 911, and the dispatcher was asking what was happening, her voice sharp with urgency. I told her the person had left, had run into the woods, and she said to get everyone inside and lock the doors until police arrived. We went back in, and Colin immediately started checking every room in the house, turning on every light, looking in closets and under beds like we were kids afraid of monsters again. Except this monster had been real, had walked through our house while we sat 15 feet away eating turkey. Brett found it first, in the hallway outside the bedrooms. Muddy boot prints on the hardwood floor, the same tread pattern from outside, leading from the back door down the hall and stopping right outside the kitchen doorway. Right where we'd heard those footsteps stop. Whoever it was had stood there, just around the corner from where we were all gathered, and listened. Maybe watched. The prints then led back down the hall to the back door, tracking mud the whole way. Mom started crying when she saw them, and Vanessa put an arm around her shoulders. The police finally arrived, 2 squad cars with lights blazing, and we all poured outside to meet them like they were the cavalry. We told them everything, showed them the footprints outside and inside, pointed to where the figure had disappeared into the woods. The officers took our statements, photographed the prints, checked the whole house top to bottom with their flashlights and weapons drawn. One of them, an older cop with gray in his beard, told us this wasn't the first incident like this in the area. There'd been 3 other break-ins over the past month, all rural properties, all during times when families were gathered for dinner or events. Someone was watching these houses, learning routines, waiting for the perfect moment when everyone was distracted. He said they'd been lucky, though, because in the other cases, The intruder had taken things: jewelry, cash, electronics. Sometimes just weird stuff, personal items that had no resale value but meant something to the families. Our house hadn't been touched, nothing missing that we could find, which somehow made it worse because that meant the person hadn't come to steal. They'd just come to be there, in our space, listening to our family, standing in our hallway while we celebrated. The police stayed until almost midnight, walking the property line with flashlights, taking more photos, filing their report. They said they'd increase patrols in the area, that we should install motion sensor lights all around the house and consider getting security cameras. The older cop gave Mom his direct number and told her to call immediately if anything else happened, day or night. After they left, none of us could even think about going to bed. We sat in the living room with every single light in the house blazing, drinking coffee that nobody wanted, just trying to process what had happened. Colin called a security company right there at midnight, left a message demanding someone come out first thing in the morning. Brett and Jenna decided they weren't letting the twins sleep in the back bedrooms, just made a nest of blankets in the living room where we could all see each other. Amy hadn't let go of my hand since the police arrived, and I could feel her trembling even though she was trying to act calm. Vanessa kept walking to the windows, checking the yard like the person might come back. Mom sat in Dad's old recliner, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, and she kept saying she should have moved after he died, that she'd been stubborn and stupid to stay out here alone. We packed up and left the next morning, not just for the weekend, but permanently for Mom. Colin and I spent Friday loading her essential stuff into a rental truck while Brett stayed inside with everyone else. Nobody willing to be alone for even a minute. Mom's moving in with Vanessa in Maryland until we can find her a place closer to one of us, somewhere with neighbors you can actually see and streetlights and people around. The security company came out that morning like Colin demanded, installed cameras and new locks, but it didn't matter because Mom refused to spend another night there. I don't blame her. None of us do. The house sold 3 months later, way below asking price once word got around about what happened, and the new owners are a young couple who don't seem bothered by the history. Good for them, I guess. As for the person who broke in, the police never caught them. The other break-ins stopped after that night, which the cops said might mean the person moved on to a different area or got spooked by the increased police presence. But I think about it all the time, about those footsteps in the hallway, about that figure turning to look at us before disappearing into the woods, about how close they were, how long they might have been standing there listening to us laugh and eat and celebrate, and how we had no idea. I still can't shake the thought of what they wanted, why they chose that night, what they were waiting for. And every Thanksgiving since, even surrounded by family in Vanessa's well-lit suburban neighborhood, I find myself watching the windows, checking the locks twice, listening for footsteps that shouldn't be there. A first Thanksgiving in my own place had felt like some sort of milestone, so the day started earlier than usual, with me buzzing around the kitchen trying to prove I could host without burning anything. My family trickled in carrying dishes wrapped in foil, filling the house with the kind of noise I used to miss when I lived in cramped apartments. By late afternoon, everything smelled like roasted herbs and butter, and the only thing still on my mind was whether the gravy would come out too thick. The dining room window caught my eye for a moment while I set the table. Just a quick glance to make sure it was locked tight, because the breeze outside had been sharp all morning. I remember shutting it firmly, even testing it with the heel of my hand before walking away. The meal had barely settled into that comfortable rhythm, passing plates, teasing each other about portion sizes, when something small tugged at my attention. The dining room window looked slightly open, not wide, just a sliver, enough to break the seal I knew I'd closed. At first I blamed myself, thinking maybe the latch hadn't caught all the way, but the longer I stared, the more it bothered me. The air coming through felt colder than before, carrying that faint scent of damp leaves, the kind that only drifts in when someone has been walking outside. My cousin joked that I was acting like a paranoid homeowner, and everyone laughed, so I forced a smile and sat back down, pretending the whole thing wasn't gnawing at the edges of my mind. My dog Riley shifted under the table not long after, and I heard this low rumble from him. Nothing theatrical, just a deep warning he'd never used around my family. He was staring down the hallway, his shoulders stiff, refusing to take a single step toward it despite my attempts to coax him over. Riley's never been dramatic. If anything, he's lazy to the point of comedy, so seeing him locked onto that dark stretch of hallway made the hair rise along my arms. The hallway light had flickered earlier in the day, and right then it looked darker than it should have, almost like the shadows were pressed thicker against the walls. Conversations at the table kept going, but mine drifted away completely as Riley let out another low sound, his entire body angled toward the unseen. Trying to shake the uneasiness, I discreetly checked the security app on my phone just to reassure myself that nothing strange had happened outside. A notification blinked at the top, motion alert from 10 minutes earlier. My thumb tapped it before I even thought about what I was doing. The clip loaded slowly, frame by frame, until a blurry shape appeared near the kitchen doorway. Someone crouched just inside, arms drawn tight to their chest, head lowered like they were listening for movement. The figure was angled toward the dining room, toward us. My breath caught somewhere deep, trapped, as I scanned the room filled with my family, laughing, eating, completely unaware that someone else had already slipped inside. And if the alert was from 10 minutes ago, that meant they hadn't left. I kept my expression as neutral as possible, though my mind was spinning so fast it felt like the room tilted a little. Every sound around me, the clinking forks, the chair legs scraping lightly against the floor, my aunt laughing at some half-told story, suddenly felt too loud, too exposed. Riley pressed himself against my leg, still locked on the hallway, and that's when it struck me that the kitchen doorway, the one from the video, sat only a few steps from where everyone was sitting. I couldn't warn them without risking panic, and I had no idea where the person in the video had gone. The thought that they might be standing just out of sight, listening to everything, made my pulse beat so sharply in my ears that I could barely make out what anyone was saying. I excused myself as casually as I could, pretending I needed to check on the rolls in the oven. My hand brushed the back of my chair, and I forced myself not to look toward the hallway again. Once I slipped into the kitchen, I kept low, moving silently across the tile. Nothing looked disturbed, the same towel draped over the counter, the same pan soaking in the sink, but the air felt subtly different, as if someone had walked through recently and left a faint trace behind. My phone was still open to the paused motion clip, and seeing that crouched shape again made the kitchen feel tighter, like the corners of the room were deeper than usual. I didn't dare call out. Even whispering felt dangerous, like it might draw attention from the wrong corner. I checked the back door next, pretending it was part of kitchen hosting duties, in case anyone peeked in. It was locked, deadbolt fully turned. No one had slipped out that way. The thought crept in slowly, unwanted. Whoever had been in the doorway hadn't left at all. They were still here, tucked somewhere silent, waiting for something I didn't want to imagine. I moved toward the hallway entrance, just enough to steal a glance. The shadows stretched long across the floor, swallowing the first few feet of the corridor. From the dining room, I could hear my family talking, totally oblivious to the fact that danger might be only a few steps behind me. I considered calling the police quietly from my phone, but the idea of speaking, even in a whisper, felt like tempting fate. Instead, I texted my brother, who was seated on the opposite end of the table. I kept it short. Someone inside. Don't react. Follow my lead. I watched the typing dots appear almost immediately, then vanish. A moment later, I heard him push his chair back, just enough to stand, stretching like he needed to step away for a moment. His voice came out steady, almost casual, as he said he needed something from his car and asked if I could help him grab a dish from the trunk. It was our silent code from childhood, something we used to get out of awkward situations, now repurposed for something far more terrifying. We walked toward the front door together, side by side, matching each other's pace so it didn't look unusual. Riley tried to follow, nails clicking nervously against the floor, but I gently motioned for him to stay. The moment we were out of view of the dining room, my brother's expression changed completely. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darted toward the hallway like he expected something to step out. I handed him my phone, letting him see the paused image of the crouched figure. His shoulders pulled back in a way that reminded me of when he used to defend me from kids in school, except this time we weren't dealing with kids. When we stepped outside, the cold air wrapped around us like a slap, grounding us both as we moved quickly toward his car. Once we reached the driveway, he unlocked the car with shaking urgency, pretending to rummage through the trunk in case anyone was watching. I whispered everything I'd noticed. The window, Riley's behavior, the motion alert, each detail threading into a picture that felt more unreal the longer I said it out loud. My brother's hands hovered over the trunk for a second before he reached into a side compartment and grabbed a tire iron. He didn't say anything at first, just took a slow breath, looked toward the house, and then said he'd circle quietly to the back door while I called for help. The plan was simple: distract, exit family safely, wait for police. But simple didn't mean safe, and both of us knew it. I dialed emergency services right there in the driveway, keeping my voice low as I explained the situation. The operator told me to stay outside and not re-enter the home under any circumstances, but leaving my family inside with an unknown person lurking somewhere in the shadows felt unbearable. I peeked through the dining room window from outside, watching them laugh and reach for more food, completely unaware. The warmth inside looked almost unreal from where I stood, like a scene from a snow globe sealed away. I wanted to burst in and shout, to drag everyone to safety, but the operator insisted that staying calm was crucial. Panic could corner the intruder or put my family at greater risk. My brother appeared again near the side of the house, his silhouette barely visible. He mouthed, "Back door," then gestured that it was still locked. That meant the person hadn't slipped out that way either. Police sirens sounded faintly in the distance, not close, but close enough to give me hope. My brother signaled for me to get ready, and together we started forming a plan to gather the family near the front door once officers arrived. We didn't know where the intruder was hiding, behind a cracked closet door, under the basement stairs, tucked into some shadowed corner. All we knew was that the moment the sirens grew louder, the air inside the house would shift, and whoever was lurking might try to run. The police pulled up with their lights off, moving with the kind of quiet efficiency that made the whole situation feel even more real. 2 officers approached, and my brother and I explained everything quickly. The window, the dog, the hallway, the motion alert. They signaled for us to stay outside, then knocked on the front door like they were making a polite visit. When my aunt answered, confusion washed over her face, but the officers eased into the room calmly, telling everyone they needed to step onto the porch due to a possible security issue. My family thought it was some sort of misunderstanding, but the moment they saw the expressions on our faces, they filed out fast, clutching coats and serving spoons like they weren't ready to leave the meal behind. Once everyone was outside, the officers swept through the house, announcing themselves as they moved from room to room. It didn't take long for one of them to signal for the other. From where we stood on the porch, we heard a heavy thud, something like furniture shifting, and then footsteps moving fast. My brother reached for me instinctively, pulling me a little closer to the group. A few seconds later, the second officer's voice rang out, sharp and controlled, commanding someone to stay where they were. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. The next noise was unmistakable. Someone running through the kitchen, the frantic shuffle of shoes on tile, followed by a door slamming somewhere deeper in the house. The officers reappeared minutes later, breathless but composed. They said someone had been hiding behind the washer in the laundry room, wedged into the gap like they'd been there for a while. When the officers approached, the person bolted through the connecting door into the garage and managed to slip out before backup arrived. They'd searched the yard, the street, the neighboring properties, no trace. Whoever it was had vanished into the evening as if they'd been swallowed by it. The officers didn't sugarcoat anything. The intruder had entered with intention, had stayed close enough to watch us through the doorway, and had likely been moving around the house during dinner. That night, after everyone left and the house was quiet again, I sat in the kitchen staring at the spot where the figure had crouched in the motion clip. Riley lay against my feet, finally calm, but I kept imagining the intruder listening to our conversations, only a few steps away, deciding whether to come closer. I replaced the locks the next morning, installed alarms on every window, and added cameras to places I didn't even realize needed them. But even now, I still think about that 10-minute gap, how all of us were eating, laughing, celebrating, completely unaware that someone had already slipped inside and chosen not to reveal themselves. Nothing else ever happened in the house after that, and maybe that's the only thing that lets me sleep. Driving late the night before Thanksgiving used to feel like a small tradition of mine, a quiet break from the chaos of family gatherings. That year, work had kept me later than expected, so I ended up crossing miles of empty highway with only a thermos of stale coffee and an old playlist keeping me company. The road looked almost abandoned, with those long, dark stretches where the headlights seemed to carve out their own little world. I remember thinking it was one of those rare nights where the silence felt heavier than usual. Not in a bad way, just the kind that makes every small sound echo a bit louder inside your head. My life back then was pretty simple. Long work weeks, living alone in a small rented place and taking whatever chances I had to visit my cousins across the state. Somewhere past midnight, the gas gauge dipped low enough to make me nervous. The next station appeared out of nowhere. One of those old ones with a flickering sign and only 2 pumps. The type you'd expect to see in a movie where nothing good ever happens. Still, I pulled in because there wasn't another option for at least 40 miles. The place was so quiet that even stepping out of the car felt like disturbing something. The cold air hit me fast, carrying this faint smell of dust and old fuel, and the only light came from the buzzing fluorescent tubes above the pump canopy. Inside the station, I spotted the clerk behind the counter, a tall guy with a worn-out hoodie and hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it all night. As I started fueling up, I casually glanced toward the store window, expecting the clerk to be bored out of his mind. Instead, he was staring straight at me with this intense expression, eyebrows drawn tight, mouth slightly open like he was about to yell something. At first, I thought he needed me to come inside to fix something with the card reader. But then his hands started moving fast, not waving me in but making these sharp motions for me to stay where I was. He kept shaking his head hard, pointing toward my left like he was trying to warn me about something specific. His gestures didn't look confused or exaggerated. They looked desperate, like someone warning a friend about a step they were about to miss on a broken staircase. I followed the direction of his pointing, turning slowly because my brain wasn't catching up to whatever he already knew. That's when I noticed an old pickup sitting directly behind my car, tucked close enough that I should have heard it pull in, but I hadn't heard anything. The truck looked neglected, the kind that had lived through decades of dirt roads. Its paint peeled into strange patches, windshield covered in streaks. What made my ribs tighten was the driver, crouched low behind the open door, partially hidden, but perfectly still. His head was slightly tilted, and even from the dim light I could tell he wasn't looking at the pump or the station. He was watching me, like he'd been waiting for me to realize he was there. My first instinct was to pretend I hadn't seen him, though my pulse felt like it was tapping at my ribs in short, uneven hits. I tried to shift my weight casually, reaching for the pump handle like everything was fine, but my mind kept replaying the stillness of that guy behind the truck door. He wasn't fumbling with anything or looking around. He was set on me, like he was waiting to see what choice I would make. When I glanced back toward the clerk, the guy inside was practically leaning over the counter now, waving again with these sharp motions that meant only one thing: get back in the car, now. That urgency finally anchored me enough to act without thinking. I pulled the nozzle out so fast a bit of gas splashed onto the pavement, and I didn't bother putting the pump back properly. The metallic click echoed way too loud in the still night as I slammed the gas cap shut. Every step toward my door felt way longer than it should have, like the gravel under my shoes was dragging me down. I didn't want to look at the pickup again, but curiosity got the better of me for a split second. The man behind the door hadn't changed position, not a twitch, not a shift, just that angled stare locked on me. It felt like he was trying to predict exactly when I'd reach the door handle. Once I got inside the car, I didn't waste a second. I locked the doors, jammed the keys into the ignition, and the engine sputtered before catching loud enough to crack the quiet around the station. As the headlights washed over the lot, I finally saw something I hadn't noticed before. The pickup had no license plates, front or back, just empty brackets where they should have been. That detail sent a jolt through me, not the kind that makes you panic instantly, but the kind that rearranges your priorities in an instant. There was no scenario where someone crouching behind a plateless truck in a deserted station meant anything good. I backed out too quickly, tires skidding a little on the loose gravel, and swung onto the road faster than I usually would. The darkness swallowed the station behind me, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd left the whole thing behind. But when I glanced at the rearview mirror, a pair of dim headlights rolled out from the station and settled into the lane behind me. The pickup stayed at a distance at first, almost like whoever was driving didn't want to make it too obvious. But the road was empty for miles, and having a truck with no plates trailing directly behind me at that hour made the whole stretch of highway feel smaller and smaller. I pushed the accelerator a little harder, not enough to look suspicious, but enough to put some space between us. The highway stretched ahead in a long ribbon of darkness, broken only by the reflective posts along the shoulder. Every time I checked the mirror, the pickup stayed right there, never gaining, never fading back, just holding position like it was tethered to me. I started scanning the sides of the road for any other signs of life, another car, a rest area, anything at all. But the world outside felt emptied out, as though the night had carved away everything except the two of us. The longer it stayed behind me, the more certain I became that this wasn't some coincidence. After a few miles, the pickup inched closer, just slightly, but enough that the headlights filled more of the mirror. I could make out the cracked grille, the mismatched headlights, one dimmer than the other. Whoever was inside wasn't trying to pass me or fall back. They were studying my speed, matching every move. I switched lanes once just to test a theory. The pickup drifted over immediately. That cemented it for me. This person had followed me deliberately, and whatever they wanted, it wasn't going to happen on an empty stretch of highway where no one could hear a thing. My throat felt tight as I tried to think of options with miles of darkness on either side. Up ahead, I spotted a small exit with a sign for a local campground, barely lit by a single spotlight that hummed against the night. I didn't know the area at all, but I knew one thing. If I kept driving straight, the truck would have every advantage. So at the last second, I flicked my blinker on and took the exit. The pickup hesitated, just a beat, but that hesitation told me everything. Whoever was following me hadn't expected a sudden turn. I sped down the off-ramp toward a narrow road lined with tall pines and patches of gravel. For a few crucial moments, there was no one behind me. No headlights, no engine hum. Just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of tires on uneven pavement. At the bottom of the hill, the road split into two directions. I picked the left at random, then killed my headlights and rolled slowly forward until I found a cluster of trees thick enough to hide the car from view. I sat completely still, listening. The night settled around me like a blanket, and for a long minute the world held its breath. Then, faintly, I heard the pickup roar down the road above, fast, frustrated, like whoever was driving had realized they'd lost me. The sound grew louder, then faded into the distance until I couldn't hear it anymore. I stayed tucked behind those trees for nearly an hour, before heading back to the main highway through a different route. I never saw that truck again, and I still don't understand what that man wanted from me that night. But every year since then, the night before Thanksgiving has carried a memory I don't shake easily. One that reminds me how quickly an ordinary drive can turn into something you never forget. That holiday weekend had me driving through long, empty stretches of highway, trying to make it to my parents' place before everyone went to sleep. I'd left later than planned, and the combination of warm air in the car and endless darkness outside made my eyelids feel heavier with every passing mile. My job at the time had me constantly on the road, so I was used to late drives. But something about that night felt unusually draining, like the quiet around me was pressing in from all sides. I remember humming along to an old playlist just to break the silence, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel to keep myself alert. When I saw the sign for a small rest area coming up, one of those older ones with a single building and dim yellow floodlights, I figured it was safer to stretch my legs for 2 minutes than risk dozing off behind the wheel. The parking lot was nearly empty, just one pickup far off near the tree line, and the building itself looked like it hadn't been updated in 2 decades. Still, I grabbed my keys, locked the car, and headed toward the restroom, thinking only about splashing cold water on my face. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered in that annoying way that makes everything look slightly warped around the edges. The place smelled like bleach and old paper towels, and my footsteps echoed louder than they should have in such a small space. I remember standing at the sink, leaning forward, and cupping water over my face, trying to wake myself up. As I lowered my hands, a faint shuffle came from the far stall. Nothing unusual at first, just the kind of noise anyone might make. But then, clear as if someone were standing right behind me, a whisper brushed the air with my full name. Not a nickname. Not a vague sound. My actual name, spoken in a low, almost careful voice. Every part of me tensed instantly, and I spun around so fast the water dripped down my sleeves. The stalls were all closed, but the room was silent again, like the sound had never happened. No footsteps, no breathing, just the buzzing light overhead. I backed toward the exit with my heart hammering hard enough to feel it in my throat. The cold outside hit me like a slap, and all I wanted was to get inside my car and lock the doors. The lot still looked empty, except for that same old pickup near the trees, but something about it seemed different, like it was angled slightly closer to the building than before. I didn't wait around to confirm. As I reached my car, I noticed something stuck under my wiper blade. A small scrap of paper, folded once. At first I thought maybe it was a warning about the weather, or some maintenance notice the highway workers left behind. But when I opened it, I felt the air around me shift. In uneven handwriting, almost like it had been written in a moving vehicle, were the words, "I followed you from the last station. You shouldn't be out here alone." The message didn't make sense at first. I hadn't stopped anywhere except for a quick gas station miles back, and even then I barely interacted with anyone. I scanned the lot again, feeling a prickling pressure crawl up my spine as I rushed into the driver's seat and slammed the locks down. I pulled onto the road faster than I probably should have, the tires kicking up gravel as I merged back onto the highway. For a few seconds, only darkness stretched behind me, the kind that makes you feel swallowed by everything outside your headlights. I tried convincing myself the note was some kind of awful joke, or a random creep trying to scare whoever parked next to them earlier. My thoughts were scrambling in every direction, replaying every moment at that gas station, trying to remember faces, voices, anything that might explain what was happening. I kept checking the mirrors, telling myself I was just being paranoid after the whisper in the bathroom. But halfway through a long curve in the road, a pair of headlights blinked into view in the distance behind me, far too bright and rising into frame way too quickly. The shape of the vehicle didn't come into focus at first, just the glow of white light bouncing across the asphalt like someone pushing their engine harder than they should. And as it closed the distance, I realized I'd seen that silhouette before. The headlights trailed me with a stubborn steadiness, never getting close enough for me to make out the driver, but never dropping back either. I remember tightening my grip on the steering wheel, trying to keep my speed reasonable, telling myself I wouldn't give whoever was behind me the satisfaction of seeing me panic. But the road ahead stretched into miles of nothing. No towns, no signs, not even another car passing in the opposite direction. The kind of emptiness that makes you feel like the world has narrowed down to just you and whoever decided to follow. At one point, the vehicle behind me shifted slightly to the left, not enough to pass, just enough to show it could if it wanted to. The glare filled my mirrors, washing out the inside of my car until everything looked pale and washed, like the interior was losing its color. I tried switching lanes once, and the headlights mimicked me instantly, like a shadow glued to my rear bumper. I started replaying the night in my head, wondering if I'd accidentally cut someone off earlier or if something about me had drawn attention at the gas station. I'd only gone inside to grab a coffee and use the restroom, barely looking at anyone. Remember a man leaning against a vending machine, tapping his foot fast enough to make the whole thing tremble. But he never even glanced my way. Or at least, that's what I thought at the time. My mind kept dragging me back to the whisper in the rest area bathroom, and the realization that someone must have been close enough to say my name without me seeing them. The idea of someone hiding in one of those stalls, watching me through the gaps, lodged itself in my head and refused to let go. The more I thought about it, the more the steering wheel felt slick under my palms, like my body couldn't decide whether to sweat or shiver. The vehicle behind me suddenly surged forward, shrinking the gap between us until its headlights filled every corner of my rear window. The road remained narrow and winding, giving me no shoulder and no exits, just guardrails and dense woods pressing in. My pulse hammered so hard I could feel it in the sides of my neck, and every small bump in the pavement made me jolt. I tapped my brakes lightly, hoping the driver might back off, but instead the headlights lowered for a moment, dipping as if the driver leaned in closer, studying the back of my car. That tiny movement felt worse than if they'd laid on the horn or tried to ram me. It wasn't anger, it was patience. Intentional. Like whoever was behind the wheel was waiting for a moment I hadn't given them yet. I made a split-second decision to take the next turn I saw, even if it led somewhere I didn't recognize. When a narrow county road appeared on my right, barely lit, almost blending into the darkness, I turned so sharply that everything in my passenger seat slid against the door. Gravel popped under my tires, and for the first time all night, the headlights behind me hesitated. The vehicle slowed at the intersection, hovering there instead of following immediately. Those few seconds of distance felt like the first breath after being underwater too long, but the relief didn't last. As I sped deeper into the dark stretch of road, my phone buzzed inside the cup holder. A message notification lit the screen. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity overpowered fear. When I glanced down, the text preview made my throat tighten. Wrong turn. Every instinct in me screamed to throw the phone out the window, but I kept it face down beside me, terrified the next message might pop up with something even worse. The road narrowed further, lined with tall grass that swayed in the wind like it was trying to flag me down. My headlights picked up an old mailbox here, a leaning fence post there, but nothing that suggested a house with lights on or anyone who might help. I kept glancing between the road and the mirror, waiting for those headlights to reappear. When they finally did, they came silently around the bend, creeping into view like the driver wanted me to know they were done waiting. The way the vehicle moved, slow, steady, deliberate, made the hairs along my arms lift in a way that felt primal, the kind of fear that bypasses thought and hits straight into instinct. My breathing turned shallow as I leaned forward, scanning the road for any hint of a driveway or a turnout wide enough to pull into. Up ahead, I spotted the silhouette of a small bridge crossing a shallow creek. It wasn't much, just a short concrete span with rusty railings on either side, but it gave me an idea. The moment I crossed it, I slowed down just enough to make it look like I was reconsidering the road, maybe even planning to stop. Behind me, the headlights grew closer again, the glow bouncing against the guardrails. I waited until the vehicle was nearly on me, then pressed the gas pedal to the floor. My car shot forward, engine whining as the bridge vanished in the rearview mirror. I wasn't trying to outrun them. I knew my little sedan didn't stand a chance against whatever bigger engine they had. I just needed enough distance to make the next part work. A few hundred yards ahead, the road curved left behind a cluster of overgrown bushes and a sloped ditch. Through the beam of my headlights, I spotted a narrow service path cutting into the brush, barely wide enough for my tires. I took the turn so sharply the seatbelt dug into my shoulder. The car lurched down the slope, branches scraping the sides with a sound like nails dragging across metal. I killed the engine, shut off the lights, and lowered myself as far as I could in the seat, praying my car blended into the darkness. My heartbeat pulsed in my ears, drowning out everything else. Then I heard it, the low, slow hum of the other vehicle approaching the curve. The headlights washed faint light across the tops of the bushes, but didn't reveal the car itself yet. I clamped a hand over my mouth, afraid even my breathing might give me away. The vehicle slowed so much it sounded like it was crawling, the gravel crunching softly under its tires. For a moment, I imagined the driver stepping out, scanning the roadside, walking straight toward where I was hiding. The brush surrounding my car felt too thin, too revealing, like a single movement would shift the branches and betray me. The headlights finally passed the curve, spilling across the empty road ahead before turning away completely. The engine rumble faded little by little until the night swallowed it. I stayed pressed down in the seat long after the sound disappeared, afraid it might circle back in silence. When I eventually sat up, my body felt stiff and uncooperative, like fear had turned every muscle into stone. I turned the engine on again, letting the low hum settle my nerves, and followed the service path until it connected with a different stretch of county road. By the time I reached a main highway with actual traffic, I could finally breathe normally again. I didn't see the vehicle again that night or any night after, and no more messages came through. My family never noticed how shaken I was when I arrived, and I never brought it up. Even now, years later, I still think about that whisper in the rest area bathroom and the note under my wiper. Whoever followed me that night knew my name, and they were close enough to speak it.